Welcome. Thank you for tuning in to Gather and Heal, the podcast. Hey, hey. Thank you so much for coming back and tuning in to another episode. This episode is going to be what I'm calling a solo-sode, where it's just me, myself, and I. We've had a couple of these. We've also had a few with other guests. I have a dope lineup of recording podcast episode with some really amazing guests who will be coming through and sharing their gifts with you. And, even if you find potentially that a whole episode doesn't land with you and it doesn't completely resonate, it doesn't mean that you can't pull out gems. So keep that in mind when you listen to these podcast episodes, or maybe you're in a class or having a conversation with someone, but how do you branch it out and give yourself permission to say hey, it's cool if this whole thing isn't exactly what I thought it would be or exactly what I wanted. What are some of the snippets and what are some of the pieces that I can pull out that can really help me propel forward? And sometimes, I'm going to pause for a second. I'm thinking about a quantum hypnosis journey that I took the other evening in a class. And during our discussion afterwards, someone mentioned, I feel like there are times when we are looking for this big magical thing or big dramatic experience, and anything that falls short of that, we kind of this is my terminology, just want to throw it out the window. We want to throw the whole thing out the window because it didn't meet said expectation. And when it comes to expectations, they can really get in the way of us being able to pull out snippets, pull out key pieces or gems, and still be able to get what we need, whether or not we know we need it. Because there's that piece too. But how do we really give ourselves permission to explore things with what Buddhists call a beginner's mind? And the more that we keep this open perspective, and the more that we look at things, discussions, learning, conversations, whatever it might be, the more that we step into that space, literally and figuratively, with a beginner's mind, I guarantee you will walk away feeling richer each time. And there's no mistake behind that. Because despite something not meeting your full expectation, that's your conscious expectation. Okay? We don't know what our subconscious needs and what it's waiting for, and what magical word or piece of information it needs for everything to just click. And when we're waiting for that particular magical boom, or people talk about it a lot in regards to relationships, where they're like, I don't know, I didn't feel the spark. Well, don't get me wrong, the spark is nice and all, but sparks don't last 24/7, 365. So what else about this dynamic in this relationship keeps you going, keeps you thriving? Because each day in and day out, it might not be that big ass spark that you felt right in the beginning, but it doesn't mean that you don't love that person or those people anymore. So when we're thinking about expectations, I want to talk about expectations from the perspective of parts, right? Because we have parts, and one or maybe a few of our parts are holding a particular expectation for an experience, a relationship, a job, a salary, life milestones. And what happens though is that if that part that expectation is the only thing that we're looking at and the only thing that we're aiming for, well, I'm pretty sure we're missing out on mad other shit. And the way I look at that's unfair to you, because you deserve to have the openness and the beginner's mind, so that way all of the greatness, the juicy information, the knowledge, the experiences can all be yours. And now let me also remind you that yes, you are worthy of all of those things. You deserve all of those things. And remember, ask that part of expectation to give a little bit of space, because sometimes that thing might be rest. It might not be this huge, magical, glorious thing that you have to do or go get. One of my favorite pieces to remind not only myself of, and my clients and my loved ones, and also you, because I don't know if you knew, but we homies now, okay? So you see me, you better like, yo, Vanessa, so hey, what's up? But one of the things I like to remind all of us of is the fact that we have the resources and all of the things that we need within us, which is why I say it so often that I am not the expert. I have particular training, I have my own particular experiences, but I am the expert in no one else's life but my own. And yes, my experiences and the direction and my healing and my propelling forward can change, especially if you share something with me, if you share an experience that challenges me to look at something differently. What? Let's go. And that's the piece where gather and heal, why our foundation is so important surrounding the concept of we heal in community, we heal together, is because there are so many beautiful gems and information and experiences and so on that you bring that I don't have, or maybe I just haven't tapped into just yet. And that's cool, because I love learning. I love learning, especially from other people. And especially knowing that we are, as a community, so diverse that I don't look at any other person who may look like me or identify similarly to certain categories the way that I do. I don't look at that person and be like, yo, we're the same. Because no, we're not. I don't care if we grew up in the same neighborhood. I don't care if we share the same ethnic identities, or relationships or things like that. It doesn't matter, because unless you can come through and you tell me that you have lived in my body, which we know that hasn't happened, then you can't tell me. Because, and let me connect this back to trauma as well, right? And when we're talking about trauma and we're talking about people's experiences, is that we could be in the same exact car that may have been in an accident, and one person walks away thoroughly traumatized, maybe doesn't get in a car for years or months, and the other person is back in the car later that day, right? Same car, same experience, but the way that it landed and resonated with each individual and all of their parts in their system was very different. So that goes to say the same around, if we grew up in the same neighborhood, we may have had similar experiences, but the way I walked away from my neighborhood and the way you walked away from your neighborhood are not the same. And who's to say that your direction out of the neighborhood didn't teach you some things that you could loop back and teach me? Because the direction that I walked out of the neighborhood took me a different path, and I got different experiences and exposures and so on. As I I talk about my neighborhood, I think about what brought me to the social work field. And let's do a little bit of story time. So I grew up in what Jennifer and I like to call the 02130, which is Jamaica Plain in Boston, Massachusetts. And if you're new to JP, it's 2020. The way that shit's set up right now is not the way it was set up when I was growing up. So you can't picture JP the way it is right now and think you have an idea of how I grew up, because that ain't it. But I'll leave it at that. But essentially, I grew up in JP, went to school down the street from like K1 to 8th grade. Shout out to Our Lady of Lourdes. It's not there anymore. And then I went to high school in another town, and remember having a very different experience than some of my neighbors that grew up literally right next door or right across the street and so on. Well, I then went off to college, also outside of the city, but still in Massachusetts. And whenever I would go back to JP, when I'd go back home, I'd be like, yo, these same people, right now we're talking about like my age bracket, these same people are doing the same things. And when I'm talking about the same things, I'm not talking about like, oh, they're going to work every day or whatever it might be. It's more of they are still getting involved, or still dealing substances, or I can't think of any other examples right now, but those two, were actually probably the biggest two categories. So I'd come back and I'd be like, yo, what's happening? Like, what did do I have in my life that had me come and grow up in this neighborhood and move through in a different direction than my counterparts that were the same age, or at least in the same age range, and are still doing the same thing? Well, fast forward a little bit. I graduate from college. I go ahead and I start working in retail management, because I've been working in retail since I was like 16 or something. So I was like, oh, this is familiar. Let me go ahead and do this. Like, I could do this. Psh, I indeed could not do this. So I started working out in for a large retail company. Hated it. I think I don't even remember how long I lasted. I lasted for a little bit, but I was like, this ain't it. This ain't life. It wasn't fulfilling, right? And even though I couldn't say exactly what I wanted to do at that time, because I couldn't, I knew that wasn't it, right? So even in my early 20s, I knew that doing this job wasn't fulfilling, and I was clear about it. So then I chug along. I go back to work for another retail company as a manager, and because it was familiar to me, I had been working in it throughout college. And I was like, okay, I may not love it, but I know I can do it and I can tolerate it differently than I can for this other company. So cool. I keep doing that. In the meantime, I'm still having this like sidebar thought process and conversation within myself that says, what does make me happy? What are the things that I feel like I can do day in and day out? And how do I also give myself permission to expand and be really curious beyond the things that I know? Beyond the things that I know, / beyond the things that I'm taught. Doctor, lawyer, nurse, scientist. It's those sorts of very common recommendations from families, black and brown families, So I forget who mentioned it to me, but they were like, oh, why don't you look at a social work program? What? I was like, I don't even know what social work is. Like, what is that? What is the social worker beyond what I see on TV, that social workers work for some version of child protective services and are all up in your business in your house, so on and so forth. And I did my research, and that's when it was like, oh, I like this. And that's how I went ahead and I tapped in and I started applying to MSW programs. And my second job out of college is one that I actually stayed at for a number of years because I loved the work. It put me directly in community with young people who were growing up in Jamaica Plain and Roxbury and Dorchester, in Mattapan, and, you know, being an adult and being a person that these young people could look at and be like, oh shit, my therapist looks like me. One, my therapist, even though I don't know exactly where she grew up, but she knows what I'm talking about when I reference certain things. I was hip, okay? I've been hip. And so I really love that. I love being able to communicate with others, show them that we have options, that we can expand, that we have the ability within us, the resources within us to be amazing humans, be amazing people in these bodies that we have. And don't get me wrong, life isn't easy. And it's definitely not easy when you're fucking 13 years old and you're trying to navigate maybe a little bit of school, navigate life with an affiliation and family and trauma, and like there's just layers and layers and layers. I don't live in La La Land. With that said though, I do wholeheartedly believe that our greatness is already here, and that there are so many distractions and so many different things that kind of like pull us away from it sometimes. And I love to be able to sit with people virtually or in person or in the house or in the car or like whatever it might be, because the setting doesn't necessarily matter. It's like, how am I showing up with my self energy to welcome your self energy, so that way we can move through some of these layers and barriers and challenges and just fucking things in life that are here and are part of our reality, so that you can see yourself. You can lead with your self energy. And the deeper that I continue to step into my clarity and understanding my purpose and loving on myself and those around me and living a life filled with purpose, joy, and community, the more I want to call in the homies, the more I want to bring more people, so that way we can all do it. We can all live life day in and day out with purpose, joy, and community, and leading with our authentic selves. Yeah. So I hope you enjoyed this solo-sode that I had. I'm talking a little bit about my journey into social work, talking a little bit about and reminding not just you, also myself, all of us, that what we need, we already got. It's here. And sometimes we just need to shine the light on ourselves and make sure that we're feeding our souls, feeding our spirits with the nutrients, the resources, the information that it needs to grow and to thrive. So on next week's episode, I have a dope guest. I hope y'all listen and come through. I like to incorporate polls. So if you are listening on Spotify, go ahead and answer the poll. Interact with us, right? Like, that's the best part about community. I mean, I don't mind sitting and talking, but I really prefer interacting with people, whether that be through email, Instagram DMs, all of that. Our information is right in the show notes. Don't forget, our Healing Connections membership has launched, and for the year of 2022, it's going to be $5 a month, because you are co-creating the space with us. And I want us to be able to like really slow down and dive in deep and build this together. I got the foundation. I think the foundation is dope. And I also know that you have dope ideas. You've got amazing experiences that we can put in and make this even more amazing and grow our community together. So, without further ado, thanks for listening. Don't forget, don't be greedy. Share this with the homies. Subscribe so that way you know whenever a new episode drops. Give us a 5-star review if you really enjoyed this or some of the other episodes. And I look forward to chopping it up with you next week. And I hope you have nothing short of a beautiful fucking day. Peace, y'all.